Good evening and welcome to a live broadcast celebrating the dark skies over northern Arizona. My name is Kevin Schindler, and I'm the historian and public information officer at Lowell Observatory. And it's really my honor to be joined tonight by Chris Luginbuhl, longtime astronomer at the Naval Observatory's Flagstaff Station, and really, if I may say, Chris, the godfather of dark sky movement, who has had such an impact on building awareness about the dark skies, not just for astronomers, but but for people around the world of all interests. It's great to have you here, Chris.
Thank you, Kevin. Nice to be here.
And tonight we're doing this program in celebration of the dark skies of Flagstaff in conjunction with Flagstaff Star Party, the Flagstaff Festival of Science. So the Flagstaff Dark Sky Coalition, which Chris has been a major player in since the beginning, one of the founders, right?
Well, I was involved when it was founded or shortly after, but I don't call myself a founder. Thank you.
Okay. And and so the Flagstaff Dark Sky Coalition and Lowell Observatory are really pleased to bring this program to everybody. And Chris, you've been talking about dark skies for a long time, and we're going to talk about it some tonight. We think about dark skies, and of course, for many people, it's thinking how it impacts astronomy because so much of the dark sky movement began with astronomy. But something we're really going to get into tonight also is how artificial light affects other things like plant and animal life and the quality of life on Earth and that sort of thing. So it's dark skies are certainly important for astronomers, but it's really important for all of life on Earth. And so we're going to talk about that some. And throughout the night, we're going to have some images up that'll tie with what we're talking about, or our behind the scenes guy, Dylan, who's a master with the telescope, is going to bring some objects up, and maybe it ties in with what we're talking about at the moment, or maybe Dylan just found something really cool he wants to share. And so we'll be looking at those on the screen. For those watching, thanks for joining us. And if you have any questions throughout the night, just type them into the comment section, and we'll try to get those as we can throughout the night or toward the end of the program whenever we can get them conveniently. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of the setup for tonight. We'll talk for about an hour. So Arizona time, that means 9 p.m. And so let's get into it a little bit, Chris. First of all, why are we talking tonight? Why aren't we doing this a couple months ago or a couple months from now?
Well, I'll take your invitation and segue into it after I say one other thing, and that is you touched on the topic of dark skies and how you and we are trying to make the point that it matters more than just to astronomers. And you talked about life and ecological impacts, health impacts, etc. I would say it's really important to think about it very broadly like that. It's kind of funny that people who look at the night sky and see the stars and are struck, maybe dumbstruck or awestruck by what they see, still tend to dismiss what they're looking at as something which is a special domain for astronomers and it's astronomy they're doing, rather than just part of their environment. I mean, when they go to Grand Canyon and look at the beautiful and inspiring views at Grand Canyon, do they think, gosh, it's sure a good thing that we saved this park so that the geologists can study rocks? But when people look at the sky, they tend to feel that, hey, this is really important to protect the darkness of the sky so astronomers can do research. Mm-hmm. And I've often said I, as a professional or a retired professional astronomer, have always been grateful that people give the topic such respect and the work that we do such respect that they think of protecting the dark skies for us. But I really want to break through that bubble and remind people or wake people up to the idea that it matters to them, whether they're astronomers or not. In fact, for every astronomer in this country, I'm going to make a number up, I don't know what it is, but there's probably 10 or 100,000 people who are not calling themselves astronomers, who are still nonetheless influenced or awestruck by a view of the universe overhead. When the sun goes down and the blue sky fades and darkens, and we begin to see through the sky into the universe around us, as I say, as night's window opens, it is an inspiring experience for all of us. And I really hope that people can make that connection, own that connection, and really help to protect skies for everybody, not just astronomers. Thank you very much.
And
So,
and I think, Chris, that gets to the core of what you do and what Lowell Observatory does in welcoming guests is, and we look at the practical importance of things like dark skies and protecting them, but there's the human element, the awe and wonder that we as humans, that's part of who we are, to look up and wonder and gaze at the universe and think of about our place and look
yes,
at other bodies out there and wonder what they're like. And that's a big part of it also. The dark
right,
skies allows us to be human, allows us
right.
to look up and wonder.
And the wonder is a big part of it. Lots of people think that scientists are only interested in answers, but no, the wonder is a part of it. In fact, that's what inspires probably most astronomers to go into the field in the first place. Certainly for me, just that sense of wonder. It doesn't matter whether you know the answers. It's just wonderful to look at, and to lose that is likewise an enormous diminishment of our environment and our human experience.
And we'll talk about this more as the night goes on, because we both certainly have examples of showing people the night sky in a place like Flagstaff, because 80% of Americans live in a place that you can't see the Milky Way. But when, like a Lowell Observatory, we're standing just above downtown Flagstaff, and yet you can look down and see kind of the glow of lights. That Flagstaff has great light regulations, but you can look up right on the brim of Flagstaff and see the Milky Way. And I've seen people tear up
Yeah.
because they've never seen it before. Or I like the ones where I had a visitor who looked up and came over and said, "I thought it was supposed to be clear tonight. What's that cloud doing up there?" And that's the Milky Way. And it's just it's inspiring to me to be able to share that with people, because you see that awe and wonder again.
Right. And you're actually, you say, on the edge of town. In fact, you're approximately or a little bit less than 1 mile from City Hall in a town of approximately 80,000 or more people. And you can see the Milky Way easily there. In fact, if you shield your eyes, if you happen to be downtown and you shield your eyes from any particular street light that happens to be nearby, you can see the Milky Way downtown in Flagstaff. So you asked me a question at the beginning, why are we doing this tonight? And the reason we're doing it tonight is because one of the ways that the Flagstaff Dark Skies Coalition helps to protect night skies is by trying to foster this connection between everybody and the night, and to try to dispel the alienness and the foreignness of a dark night, which, as you say, 80% of people, not in Flagstaff, but 80% of people in the United States live where the skies are so bright they can no longer see the Milky Way. There may be only 50 or 100 stars in the sky. Whereas when they come to the Lowell Observatory, even though a mile from City Hall, I don't know what the number is, but I would guess it's 1,000 or 2,000 stars in the sky. And that makes a big difference. And we want to get the message out there that Flagstaff, we're very proud that we have done that, but we also want the rest of it, we're beginning to realize that the rest of the world can learn something from this. That those 80% of people who are living in places where they can't see the Milky Way, and often they feel, I've received email messages from them often saying, "Oh gosh, there's nothing much we can do here. I would live in the middle of Phoenix or New York City, so it's a lost cause here. But we're really, really inspired by what you've done." That needs to be also expanded. The Dark Skies Coalition has realized that what we have done here can make a huge difference in other communities as well. And further, it's not complicated. It's not magical what we've done here. We worked hard at it, and we foster connections to the night, such as by the star party tonight, the beginning tomorrow night, excuse me, and I'll get to the details of that in a moment. But if people kind of follow the examples of what Flagstaff has done and proven not only is technically feasible, but politically feasible, economically feasible, it's safe to like the way we do, they can darken their skies by 90%. And they can bring back the Milky Way. I had a friend, Tom Palakis, if he happens to be online, he probably isn't, but Tom Palakis is a friend of mine who lives in the Phoenix metropolitan area. And he drove around for me a few weeks ago and measured the brightness of the sky in residential areas in Tempe, Arizona. That is in the heart of, or close to the heart of the Phoenix metropolitan area, a town of 5 or 6 million people, a city, a metropolitan area. And he measured brightnesses of the sky, which were too bright to see the Milky Way, but within reach of the Milky Way if they followed lighting the way Flagstaff did it. And they can do that. They could do that. Too many people in those urban areas say, oh gosh, that's okay for you in Flagstaff, but we need more light down here. No, you don't. You're the same kind of people, human beings that we are. You have the same kind of eyes. You can see as well as we can. You can be safe. You can have economic development, but you can protect your skies. And that's the message that the Flagstaff Dark Skies Coalition is aspiring to bring out here in moving forward in the last year or so. And that is described as a vision where everybody can see the Milky Way. Probably we can't get it to everybody who lives right next to a gas station, but I bet we can reduce that 80% to a much smaller number. I know we can.
And, you know, that's something that really strikes me. Flagstaff is not only the first so-called dark sky community, as designated by Dark Sky International, as they're called now, but also I think the largest, or one of the largest communities that has that designation.
It is the largest.
Okay, yeah. And so to me, it's kind of inspiring in a way, because I mean, this is a place where people, like you say, other communities come, and Flagstaff is kind of showing the way, a path to preserving dark skies. But what I think is really stands out to me is, you know, we think about artificial light as pollution, a type of pollution, light pollution. But like other types of pollution, is something that we can do something about fairly easily, and not just communities, but individuals. We can all do our part and make a difference. And and like you said, I mean, especially now as time has gone on and there are more alternates for lighting fixtures and types of light and such, that it's not like you have to pay a lot of money to have it happen. In the long run, you can look at saving money. So there's a lot of factors there that, you know, when you were in the forefront of this battle, I don't want to date you, but several years ago, it's changed a lot. There's a lot more awareness. I think something that I've enjoyed seeing over the years is instead of being combative, it's getting, you know, the dark sky preservationists, or whatever we call, working with the lighting industry to come up with solutions that work for everybody. It's not, oh, you guys are polluting the night sky. It's more of, you know, this is what we're looking at. These are studies that are coming out, the importance. How can we work together to come up with solutions?
Right. Yeah. Good. We're not talking anything complicated. I mentioned, and you underscored it. We didn't do anything magic. For example, just shielding lights. That's not complicated. Yes, the manufacturers are producing more shielded products now than they did 20 or 30 years ago. But it's really as simple as just putting something on the side of the light that keeps the light going down to the ground, which is where you need it anyway. You don't need it in the sky or across the street into your neighbor's property. But that alone will cut the sky brightness in half, reduce it by 50%. That's stunning. I think people need to realize that this is easy to do and within reach. In large cities, we need to, exactly like you said, we need to make sure that people understand that we're not about turning out lights or making it harder to see or dark. We're talking about just using light sensibly. Really, shielding a light is something that I often say, hey, a third grader gets that. You show them, we have a display we put up off it. It's just a board with a porch light on it that's classical, shines light everywhere, and then one that's easy to find but not as ubiquitous, that shines light only down. You turn those two on and you don't need to say a word. Everybody gets it. And that kind of that simplicity of technology will reduce light pollution by 50%. And other things that we can do can reduce it much, much, much more. So we can go down and bring the skies of Tempe, which are for those who are in the business of measuring brightness of skies and the esoteric astronomical units. The skies that are 18.5 per magnitude per square arc second, they can take it down to below 20. And that's what the Milky Way becomes visible when you get down around 20 or fainter.
And Chris, there's a lot of, you know, there's so many great aspects of this to talk about. Since Dylan has been, kind enough to get an object up here, let's talk about that a little bit, connect
Yeah.
it back with astronomy some. This is M11, open star cluster that is sometimes called the wild duck cluster, because depending on how much you slept and perhaps drank, you might see a flock of ducks flying across the sky in that little cluster there.
Yeah.
I mean, and this is something good to talk about with dark skies.
Right. This is a cluster which it looks like it has, I don't know, anybody who is viewing this program can make a guess as much as I can. It's looks like you can see probably several hundred stars there. And if you count the fainter ones, which are also increased in that area, probably many hundreds, maybe 1,000. This cluster is actually in a reasonably dark sky, certainly at Lowell Observatory. It's visible to the naked eye. Now, you can't see the individual stars with your naked eye, but you can see a small smudge, kind of like the size of the tip of your finger at arm's length, in the Milky Way, in the summer Milky Way, in a constellation which most people haven't heard of, called Scutum. But it's a beautiful cluster. Even with binoculars, it's nice to see.
And this is some, 6,000 light years away or so. And to be able to look back, I mean, when we do astronomy, we're looking back in time. These are time capsules.
Right. Yeah. The one to divert a little bit into an astronomical topic. When people, I often make a suggestion to people just to help them connect with the night sky. I say, go outside into a reasonably dark place. I mean, don't have a street light next to you in your backyard if it works. Lie down on the ground and look up, and rather than standing and tipping your head back. Partly it's easier to look that way because you don't have to bend your neck, but also it helps to break your sense of what is up and what's down a little bit, so that you can break that idea that the stars are up there and I'm down here, and instead think of it, I am glued to the side of the planet or a wall, and I'm looking out into the universe. Just change the words, the concepts that you use to think about what you're doing, and it can help connect you with the sky and the universe overhead even better or in a different way than you do ordinarily. I'm trying to break the habitual ways of the way we connect with the environment around us. When you do that, I also say you see bright stars and you see faint stars. Now, really, some of that is from distance. Some of the fainter ones are farther away and some of the bright ones are close. And some of them are intrinsically brighter and bigger stars. But just for the sake of imagination, I say, imagine that the bright ones are close and the faint ones are far, and try to expand that, what looks like a two-dimensional surface of sky over your head, or now that you're facing out to since you're lying on the ground. Try to expand it into 3 dimensions, and the bright stars are close and the faint stars are far away. And it's remarkable how, if you try that, it can kind of click a little bit in your brain, and you can imagine you see that depth in distance. In fact, of course, some people will criticize and say, well, that's not what you're really seeing. Some are really bright, some are really faint, and some are farther, some are closer. And that's where star clusters come in for astronomy, because star clusters, you can see in this cluster that we have on the screen here, the Messier 11 cluster, some are brighter and some are fainter, but we know they're all about the same distance. And the reason they're brighter and fainter now is because we know that intrinsically some of those stars are brighter and some are fainter. And that is an insight that astronomers had, I can't tell you when it was first had, but hundreds of years ago, that first helped us to start learning about how stars really are. How are they built? How are they different from each other? How are they staying? So clusters have been very important in the study of stars.
And I think we'll just take a quick stop here because Sherry wrote in a question a few minutes ago. It's not quite what we're talking about right now, but she had a question whether we're going to be able to see the new moon that has been in the news lately, and we won't be able to see it through these telescopes. And it's a tiny asteroid, and so if you could make it out, it would be a dot. Can you talk about that a little bit, Chris? Have you a chance to check that out?
I'm afraid I'm perhaps been getting ready for our star party, so I don't think I've heard this new moon story. So I hate to admit it as a former astronomer.
Yeah, just kind of a cool, small asteroid that temporarily caught up in Earth's gravitational pull. I mean, it won't be around for long, but it's kind of a cool thing. There's a lot of stuff floating around in space, and
Yes. As empty
and-
as it is, it's huge. So it can
yeah,
be empty and empty and have a lot of stuff in it at the same time.
right.
Or
Yep.
nearly empty, yeah.
So let's
Looks like,
go. Let's go. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, it looks like Dylan has taken us to a gaseous nebula, two kinds of nebula, gaseous and a reflection nebula, dust nebula, in, I believe, the constellation
Well,
Sagittarius. Sometimes the red one is called the Trifid Nebula
yeah,
because it's sort of divided into three parts, not because it's related to the Trifid movie.
right. And there's a there's a bunch of these regions in Sagittarius, and this is I don't know, kind of the swan song for seeing Sagittarius right now. Is still up in the sky, but it's getting lower and lower in the sky. But as we talk about the Milky Way, Sagittarius is kind of handy,
Yes.
because it's a good marker of knowing, and it's kind of a cool marker. We think of Sagittarius in mythology as a half man, half horse, but when you look in the sky, heck, doesn't look like a tea kettle,
Yes.
and the Milky Way looks like steam coming right out of the tea kettle.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then
I'm sure many of the viewers know that this is the brightest part, or at least the brightest large extensive part of the Milky Way to the naked eye. There are other small spots which are brighter, but this is looking toward the center of our galaxy. So as your vision goes, or as you imagine your vision going into greater and greater distances, as you go toward the center of the galaxy, there are many, many more stars. So there's a lot of stars that most of them are faint, but as you go out to larger distances, all those faint ones add together and create that steam, or that faint, those clouds that you're talking about, Kevin. And that's really a inspiring and beautiful part of the sky. Many people talk about seeing the Milky Way and being moved by it, even just contemplating what it is, that it's a galaxy of hundreds of billions of stars, most of them too faint to see, but all the ones we see in the sky, including the bright ones, are part of this galaxy, or nearly all the stars we see are part of this galaxy. So it's
and just
really,
to clarify,
really inspiring.
and just to clarify what you were saying, Chris, that we're in the Milky Way. When we say, "Oh, there's the Milky Way," we're looking at the center of it. It's like I like the comparison of like a big wagon wheel, where we're on one of the spokes on the outside and we're looking in toward the hub, where the greatest concentration of stars are.
Right. Yep. So one of the ways that the Flagstaff Dark Skies Coalition helps to protect dark skies is, as I said, or I started to say, by helping to create or foster a culture of night that get people out and enjoy and appreciate and see the night as a familiar and a beautiful thing, rather than a fearful and a foreign thing. So the Flagstaff Star Party is one of our premier outreach events that we do every year. We've been doing it. This is the 11th year. We welcome quite a number of people. We have a lot of telescope hosts, including the assistance of Lowell Observatory educators who bring telescopes up to the park. And we have kind of a minimum 20 in the neighborhood of 20 telescopes that people can come to and can be shown things in the night sky, both directly that are pointed out by the telescope hosts, and then looking at them through the telescope. This is a wonderful thing that people enjoy a lot every year. We do it for 3 nights beginning tomorrow night, and then we'll do it next year as well. Usually, we're often associated with the Festival of Science in Flagstaff, for those who are based in Flagstaff and know about our Festival of Science. But we are actually an independent event. Sometimes we we often overlap with the festival, but we have to move around chasing the dark of the moon, and the Festival of Science doesn't do that. So sometimes we don't overlap. But that's why we're starting the conversation tonight, is to help people understand it, or hopefully raise awareness that those who are in Flagstaff or within driving distance of Flagstaff are welcome to come up and enjoy our night skies, and also think about how they might take the lessons Flagstaff has learned about protecting night skies, take it home with them, and either at their home, if they're living in Flagstaff, make the lighting better there so it protects the sky in their neighborhood, or if they live in another community, aspire to make it better because it can be made better.
And if they do join the star party, this is another object they might be able to see through a telescope. This is the butterfly cluster in the constellation Scorpius, which is just next to Sagittarius. And I like Scorpius because, we're in Arizona. It's such a great Arizona constellation, and and when the whole thing is up in the sky, and you can see it because it extends across a large area, it looks like a scorpion. I mean, it actually
Yeah.
looks like it's supposed to.
Yeah, a lot of constellations they seem, when people have it pointed out, to say, hey, this is how Gemini, here's one twin, here's the other twin, or here's Sagittarius, which is supposed to be a half man, half horse, or archer. And it's hard to explain. It doesn't look real, but Scorpius, boy, that's one of the most naturally appearing constellations that really does look like what its namesake is. And further, it's been obvious enough that more than one culture has described that constellation as a scorpion. And I'm not an expert on other cultural astronomy, but I believe the indigenous Arabic cultures also, Arabian cultures, have they describe this as a scorpion.
And I like it this time of year because there's another object in the sky that it might be going out of the sky pretty soon, but the Sombrero Galaxy, which you can't see with the unaided eye, but through a telescope. But it looks like a Mexican hat, like a sombrero. And another great thing for Arizona, plus the sombrero has great connection to research in Flagstaff because it's the first object that Vesto Slipher looked at in 1912, 1913, that these fuzzy blobs he was looking at that was moving away from us at incredible speeds. And that's when he became the first person to detect the expanding nature of the universe. That was the first observational evidence.
Yeah, and I don't know if our viewers or our viewers tonight are aware, but the back in just 100 years ago, not much more, even less than 100 years ago, the nature of galaxies was unknown. Nowadays, all of us, even those of us who think we don't know any astronomy, know that galaxies are other. Well, it's hard to find a word for it because when we think of galaxy now, we think of a place far away, which has got hundreds of millions or hundreds of billions of stars in it. But back in the 1920s, that wasn't clear to people. Some people argued that they were maybe solar systems that were forming in our galaxy. And that's why that observations, or those early observations, many of them, the earliest ones made at Lowell Observatory by Vesto Slipher, helped to establish that these things maybe are not part of our galaxy. That wasn't really resolved conclusively or until quite a bit later than 1912, 13.
Yeah, that was a piece of the puzzle. And
Yes.
then there were a lot of other pieces that had to be put together by people like Edwin Hubble, who kind of synthesized a lot of different observations of different kinds and the ability to date some stars, the variable or the Cepheid variable stars. So it involved a lot of different observations of people. But it's interesting, the march of astronomy. Astronomy is the oldest science, and yet we continue to make major discoveries, largely because of the technology. I like talking about this, like with paleontology. You still got to dig in the ground. That hasn't changed much. You still need a shovel and a pick and everything. But astronomy, like when they put the Hubble up in the sky and pointed it at a blank, essentially a blank area in space for 10 days, and saw that section of sky like we've never seen. They discovered hundreds of galaxies just because there was better technology, and that's still happening today.
Right. And that kind of science gets more difficult when we more carelessly use light or more carelessly use satellite constellations around the orbit of the Earth. Now, the James Webb Telescope is far away and not subject to light pollution from the ground or satellite constellations. But boy, and it does wonderful things. I would never diminish what the Webb Telescope or even Hubble has been able to do. They've inspired a lot of people and produced a lot of science. But on the other hand, they there is much more astronomy to be done that can be done with even small telescopes from the ground, even today under light polluted conditions, but better if we did not so carelessly use light. And I think much more importantly, as people will think I'm a broken record, but much more importantly, that you and your children and your parents and your grandparents can look up at that sky and let your imagination soar off into that universe that you see overhead. That inspiration is something that we all benefit from. And I really would like to see the world turn around light pollution. And I think we can. I think we know how. I know we know how. And like I say, Flagstaff has proven it can be done.
Chris, when did you first get inspired by the night sky?
You know, I've tried at my age, I've thought about that quite a bit to try to remember when, but I do remember when I was fairly young, that I stepped out into my front yard, and I grew up in what people might think of as Bowash now, in the eastern seaboard, between Wilmington and Philadelphia, where even in the 60s there was a lot of light, and now even more. But I remember in my front yard being stunned by a sky which was carpeted with stars, and I think that might have been there was a this is ancient history for many of the viewers perhaps, but back in 1965, when I was just turning 10 years old, there was, or just after I had turned 10 years old in November of 1965, there was a blackout on the eastern seaboard and up into Canada, and it lasted for 10 hours or more. And I think that might be the event that I'm thinking of. And that didn't turn me into an astronomer when I was 9 or 10 years old, but I think it might have planted the seed.
So how did your career develop? Did you later on get interested and go to college for astronomy, or did you go for something else and find a new love in astronomy?
Well, most of my life, when I was very young, I think like many young boys, I had the usual sorts of ambitions to be some kind of a heroic employment, like a firefighter or a policeman or something. When I became older, I thought my career would go after what my father did, who was a chemical engineer. So I thought a lot about chemistry. But then I started drifting towards biology, and I was interested in marine biology for quite a while. And maybe it was Jacques Cousteau's programs that did that for me in the late 60s, early 70s. But then in my senior year in high school, I took an astronomy program between semesters. It was just a simple class, did very little, very minimal stuff, went out to the observatory outside of Wilmington. And that really opened the door for me. And when I went to college, I knew that I wanted to be an astronomer. I looked for places that had dark skies. And I came out here to Flagstaff, Arizona, and got my bachelor's degree at the local university, Northern Arizona University. So I was after high school, it was clear to me I was going to be an astronomer. I wanted to be studying those things that cause such a sense of awe in me.
Yeah. And the rest, as they say, is history. And you've been inspiring others with about the darkness in the night sky ever since.
Well, I hope a small part of it. Stars do a better job than me. What I'm trying to do is just convince people that it matters to them as well, not just to astronomers. And I think people don't really need to be told that. I think that they know that when they look up, and it's almost automatic speak that they say, oh yeah, dark skies, that's important for astronomy, even though their heart is beating a little harder because of what they just saw, even though they're not astronomers.
Yeah, it's interesting as we were talking. I see Dylan. He was kind of playing with exposures and everything with on this object, the Swan Nebula, which is also in Sagittarius, and it's almost like he was able to show what it looks like if you're changing the exposures, what it looks like under artificial light polluted skies versus dark skies. You can almost create that by just changing some of the settings he's doing here.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, you can change or lower the contrast or bring up the background with the software, and that you're right. It does emulate what the sky looks like. The difference being is that Dylan can undo that by another click.
Yes.
Light pollution has two things. One, you can't undo it with a click. But and you started to touch on this, Kevin, when you quite a while ago, you started to touch on this. Light pollution is a solvable pollution in a way that other kinds of pollution are not. If you shield the light or turn off an unused light, its pollution goes away at the speed of light, so to speak. It's gone. And it doesn't linger around like poisoning the riverbed from water pollution, or carbon dioxide, which will linger in the atmosphere for decades or centuries after you stop putting it in. Light pollution is not like that. Now, you and I individually cannot turn all the lights. Let's say we can imagine going into the Phoenix metropolitan area, just as an example, hauling all the lights out and replacing them with shielded fixtures, and use amber lighting. By the way, that's one important thing our viewers should understand. Use amber lighting for most lighting. It's perfectly okay to see with, and if you need white light for a restaurant or selling cars or something, fine, use white light, but use amber light most of the time. But if you can imagine in a big city like Phoenix, pulling all the light out and then replacing the fixture so the lighting on the ground where people are is exactly the same, but there's no light now being wasted into the sky, and most of the light is amber, and you still get good visibility on the ground with that, then you would cut the sky down by, I say, as much as a factor of 10, and bring the Milky Way back in most of the Phoenix metropolitan area. Now, conceptually, you could say that you could do that, and in fact, doing it in fact is a more complicated process politically and economically, but technically it is not complicated.
I think it's interesting to talk about the what we can do as individuals, but maybe it's useful, Chris, to talk about the different types of light pollution, because there's, just one single light. I mean, there's a lot of different. Oh, we're getting a little interference here. Well, maybe Chris, talk a little bit about the different types of light pollution.
Right.
That you can see, that anybody can see just through the window.
Right. Well, the two most important factors to control, and as I indicated before, a third grader will get it, is shield your lights. So you stop shining it where you're not using it, up into the sky, across the street. Shield your lights, and that's simple. There's no application where you have to use an unshielded light, not even in places where many people claim you need to, like in a sports field. You don't need to use unshielded lights in sports fields. So shield them. And number two, use light. There's kind of a hint here. The yellow lights are often, at least when you use them in residential areas, they're often called bug lights. If you go into a hardware store and want to buy an amber colored bulb, you'll often find it labeled bug light. And why do they call it a bug light? It's because it does not attract bugs so much, insects at night. And if you want to go onto your porch and not have to step on a forest of beetles that have been attracted to the light, or be surrounded by moths that are attracted to the light, then you use one of these yellow lights. There's a hint there. The yellow lights disturb insects less. They also disturb almost all other kinds of critters less, including us. Now, when I mean disturb, I don't mean that make it so you can't see. You can see under an adequate level of illumination of yellow light or white light. You can see fine, in the sense that you can identify where you need to go. You can see steps and hazards and recognize people, and etc. But the impacts that light have is more than just providing vision. They also affect our biology as human beings. And often people have heard about, I think, the idea of a circadian rhythm, the day to night cycle of our bodies and our biochemical processes. And if we expose ourselves to light at night, we disturb that rhythm. And that has a lot of only now becoming recognized impacts, negative impacts on human beings. It can increase exposure to, it can increase incidence of certain types of cancer. It can disturb your sleep, so you don't sleep as well. So anyway, using amber light is something which we should favor in most situations where the fact that the light is yellow is not a drawback, and that's most places. So those are two of the main things that we focus on. Of course, common sense stuff like don't use lights in places that you're not using. I mean, there's putting light in, let's say, a parking lot of a school when there's nobody there at night is not going to, it's been shown by research not to decrease vandalism at those schools. So we have this idea that we got to light up dark areas because it prevents crime. The data don't support that. So we can turn, there are
Easier
some
for them to
there are
break in.
opportunities for turning lights off, but that's not the main focus. Just shield them and use amber lighting, and already you've got a factor of 2 magnitudes or more in the brightness of the sky, and then bringing back the Milky Way in urban areas.
And I think, an interesting part of this conversation that I like is, there's inherent in us humans, I think, is sort of this fear of dark, fear of the night sky.
Yes.
And that's been part of, well, we have artificial light, we feel more safe. But again, the studies, show that that's not the case.
Right. There is a quote, and people who have heard me on before, I may end up sounding like a broken record, but there's a quote from an author that I really like named Henry Beston, who wrote a book some time ago, and I'll tell you later when. And in that book, he wrote about our relationship to lighting and night. And he stated this really well. He said, "Our fantastic civilization has grown out of touch with many aspects of nature, but with none more completely than with night. With lights and ever more lights, we drive the holiness and beauty of the night back to the forests and the seas." So we take it away from ourselves, and people become naturally fearful of things that they are not familiar with. That relates to the night, and it relates to almost anything. There's a natural sense of fear of the dark. I mean, because you're not as aware of what your surroundings are, and all of us have imaginations left over from our childhood where there's a monster under the bed, even though we know and we've checked 100 times and it's never there. You still have this visceral feeling, and that affects a lot of people's relationship to the night. But it's really amplified by our estrangement from the night, by this pervasive use of lighting everywhere. And I'll have to say that there are many players out there who have something to sell to you who benefit from that fear. People who want to sell you more lights, they don't mind that you're afraid of the dark. It's not that they're bad people. It's just that they're interested in selling product, and I understand it.
Mhm.
They probably even often believe it's true that it is dangerous at night when it's not bright or not illuminated, even though, like you said, and we have said both, the studies don't show that using light generally has any improvement on reducing crime at all.
There's something else that I think is interesting also. I'm trying to figure out the feedback here. Sorry about that. But light pollution isn't that old. I mean, for most of human time, we haven't had artificial light pollution, or it was very, torches and gas lights didn't do
Yes.
much, but it was the onset of electric lighting in the
Right.
late 19th century where I mean, for all of human history, or most of human history, we had dark skies. It's only in the last century and a half or so.
Yes. Yeah. If people are familiar with the paintings of Van Gogh in downtown Paris, then his paintings show stars as a prominent part of the sky in Paris. And that do you know, Kevin, when Van Gogh painted? I'm not an art historian, I don't remember, but a long time ago.
Yeah.
That paragraph I quoted from Henry Beston, the book is called The Outermost House, and anybody who is interested in looking it up it's a good read. It's not mostly about the night, but it's about living on on Cape Cod. But that was written in 1928, really at the dawn of the modern lighting era, even before rural electrification happened and light started to promulgate across the landscape. So I've often noticed this, that writers and artists are really much more sensitive to the impacts of things like that than your average person, including scientists. I don't remember scientists in the 1920s talking about the impacts of light pollution on their observatories.
So I just looked up while you're talking Starry Night, Van Gogh painted in 1889, which, by the way, is the year that Edwin Hubble was born.
Ah,
I just had that number because I share a birthday with Hubble, so I remember the year he was born. I wasn't born the same year, just the day. Now and Dylan, we've been talking, but we've got another object up here. This is a favorite object you see this at star parties a lot. The Hercules cluster, M13 as it's called.
Yes.
And maybe we should step back. We've used a couple terms here like M13 and M11. And M stands for an astronomer named Charles Messier, a French astronomer who a couple centuries ago made a catalog of these annoying objects. He was searching for comets and he found a fuzzy blob that he thought was a comet. And upon further study, realized it wasn't. And so he made this catalog of these annoying objects so that future astronomers would know to avoid them.
Right.
And today we know that this so-called Messier catalog has a great collection of star clusters and nebula and galaxies and all sorts of cool stuff.
Right.
And this is one of those. The 13th entry in his catalog
Yeah.
is this globular star cluster called the Hercules cluster.
In a way, there are about 200 or 250. I'm entirely sure, maybe as many as 300 of these clusters, these ball-shaped clusters of tens to hundreds of thousands of stars that are really like miniature satellite galaxies of the Milky Way. They orbit around the Milky Way, but they're not all the stars you see around that. The brighter stars you see around it are foreground objects of the Milky Way galaxy. And this cluster is certainly not as far away as another distant galaxy like Andromeda or the Sombrero galaxy you talked about, but it is a bit outside of the main part of the Milky Way. So they're like miniature galaxies. And boy, do they have a lot of information in them about, boy, look at how they vary in brightness. And they're also, it turns out, very, very old. They were formed at the time that the Milky Way galaxy was formed. So the stars there are almost as old as the universe, like 10 billion years old. So it's a lot of information from astronomy. A lot of information has been gleaned about the way stars form and the way they change with time from studying clusters like the previous galactic open cluster we looked at and these globular clusters. Clusters they're wonderful little, but you could think of them as kind of keystones to help you understand a lot about science.
And they're like a lot of stuff we've talked about tonight. They're just really, there's a lot of awe and wonder looking at these through the telescope.
They are beautiful.
And, one of the things I like, and one of the things we do at Lowell is, it's great to be able to get an object like this, an image on the screen, and you can do a lot of teaching with it and explain it. But looking at something like that through the eyepiece, when it doesn't matter how many people are standing around you, when you look through the eyepiece, it's just you and what you're looking at, and you really get connected with the universe around you.
Yeah, thank you, Kevin, for pointing that out. This image is pretty on the screen, but you know what? The light that you're looking at there is coming out of the whatever display you're using, and it emulates or simulates the sky, but it is not the sky. And boy, come to the Flagstaff Star Party or go to Lowell Observatory, look through an eyepiece and see the real thing directly with your eyeball. This cluster, I'm going to make a number up just for discussion purposes. I don't know. It might be 100,000 light years away. It might be 50,000 light years away. So the light that's coming from those stars has been traveling for 50,000 years. And then when you're looking through a telescope, those photons, they end their life inside your eyeball. Those photons originated at that cluster on stars. That's something that you can't say about these screens that you see that we're looking at today. And I don't want to diminish the views of what we're looking at on the screen at all. But boy, the real direct connection that you have looking up to the sky at night or looking through a telescope to those real photons, those ancient photons, is really, it can bend your mind, and it's really a wonderful experience to think about it.
And that's part of that awe and wonder when you look up, and it's not just taking a quick look, but it's thinking about what you're seeing and how far back in time you're seeing. And I like how you put it, that photon, it made that trip. It's traveled and it's about 23,000 light years away. It's taken 23,000 years. It's taken to get to your eye. So clearly, this sounds like a Mark Twain thing. Clearly that cluster was invented so that its light could end in your eyeball.
Right. So that photon, which has been produced by hot gas on the surface of a star 23,000 light years away. Thank you, Dylan. travels all that time, and then comes in, goes through the telescope, bounces around in a couple nanoseconds, literally, and then it goes into your eyeball and then is absorbed by a little molecule in there, which turns it into a nerve signal. And that's the end of that photon and the beginning of illumination in your mind.
I'm jazzed. It's just fun listening to you talk, and it reminds me that today I was giving a couple tours for media inside our new Astronomy Discovery Center at Lowell that opens in November, and it's just the way you're explaining that. You think about what you're seeing out there in the universe and the inspiration you feel and the awe and wonder of what it all means and what you're looking at. And that's something we try to capture at the Flagstaff Star Party and at Lowell Observatory and other places like this, or just going outside in a dark night. It's that, again, we get to the importance of dark skies for health reasons, for astronomy pursuits, but to me, that to be a human, to stand out there and awe and wonder, it gets at the core of all of us, no matter what our backgrounds are, no matter where we live, and we can still feel that awe and wonder when we look up at the sky.
Right. There are few things as easy to sell as the beauty and wonder of a starry sky. I don't, maybe, it's pretty rare, I'll have to admit, but occasionally I've heard people who've gone to Grand Canyon and they said, yeah, okay, big hole in the ground. Most people aren't like that by any means, but I'm not sure that I've ever heard somebody say when they've actually seen a dark sky filled with thousands of stars, yeah, bunch of lights in the sky. I've never heard that. So, and as you have said, Kevin, and you've seen it, and I've seen it as well. I've seen tears brought to people's eyes, people who know nothing about the physics of the stars or can't tell you how many light years away it is, but boy, they are struck by it to the point of tears. It is a moving experience. And I want people to understand that the loss of this that we have had is really important, and it is not necessary. We need to turn this around, and we can turn it around. And that's really the expanded, ambitious mission of the Flagstaff Dark Skies Coalition. We certainly have all seen a lot of increasing attention to light pollution in the popular press, New York Times, Scientific American, National Geographic, USA Today. Increasingly, people are aware that light pollution is a thing. But what they are not aware of sufficiently is that once they become aware of it and they care about it, they need to know that they can do something about it.
Yeah.
That it's not something that's a lost cause, even in big cities. And it has no downsides. It makes you just as safe, probably safer, because when you don't have light shining in your eyes, you can see better. You don't waste the energy. You don't have the impact on the biological systems around you, including yourself. You reduce all of those. So it's very beneficial from any perspective. And people really, if they know that might help motivate them to grapple with the difficult sociological, political, and economic problems that you have to encounter to improve lighting. But another thing is, and you alluded to this, I think, at the beginning, Kevin, is that lighting that's put up is not forever. When I was young and I saw a parking lot go up and it wasn't done right, I thought, oh, what a lost opportunity. Now we're never going to see that lit right. In fact, over years and years of watching it, stuff becomes old and replaced quicker than you think it does. So lighting, if we work on it and we make it important and we demand that light be done better, because we want to have our skies and we know we can have our skies without compromising any of the fearful or creating any of the fearful consequences that we constantly hear, then we can start to make a difference and turn this around.
And what you're saying, it reminds me of an astronaut, Nicole Stott, a good friend of Flagstaff. In fact, she's going to be back in town in November for the opening of the Astronomy Discovery Center. And she wrote a book, and she makes the point of essentially we can, on the good ship Earth, the spaceship Earth, you can be passengers or you can be crew members. I think of that with dark skies, where we can say, I can't do anything about it, or you can look at it like you're saying, and we can all do something about it. We can take an active role. We don't have to sit back and wonder if somebody else is going to do something. We can do it ourselves. We can make a contribution ourselves.
Right. And one of the points that we try to make is that if you just do a few simple things at home, you may not darken the sky of your overall community, but you can dramatically improve the night environment around your home just by doing the simple things we've talked about. You can replace a porch light. It's not going to cost you $100 to do it, and put a shielded one. And that way you can use it when you need it and nobody will be bothered by it when you do, or leave it off when you don't need it. Put an amber bulb in it. Right there, you probably reduced your impacts on the environment around your home by a factor of 50% or better.
Yep.
And it's nicer. It's nicer. You can step out in your backyard and not have to wait, or not, and be able to see more stars just from that. And that's a big impact.
And something else you can see from a decently dark sky, when you look up at night, you might see in the dark sky a couple thousand plus stars. But if you have a dark enough sky, there's something you can see if you know where to look, and it's this faint smudge, and it's the Andromeda Galaxy. Pretty much everything else you see is in our galaxy, but the Andromeda Galaxy is a separate galaxy, and this is what we're showing on the screen right now.
Right. This is a galaxy which is similar to the Milky Way, larger, but it's also a spiral galaxy. You can see some dark lines in there, which are not places where there are not stars, but rather places where there are a lot of gas and dust between the stars. So it blocks the light of the stars behind them. So it makes it look darker. So this is a galaxy much like the Milky Way, which also has lanes of dust and gas in it. We looked at it earlier on in the program, and we looked at some of the nebulae, the Trifid Nebula. Our galaxy is like this one, but this is one of the nearer ones. It's about 2.5 million light years away, and it is visible in a reasonably dark sky. You probably need to have it about where the visibility of the Milky Way is before you can see it easily.
And
it's visible.
It blows my mind. You think about the light we see from the moon, which is sunlight reflecting off of it, takes half a second or so to get to us. Sunlight takes about 8 minutes. This takes 2.5 million years. That's how long it's taken for that light to get to your eyeball. And it's, again, that looking back in time thing. And speaking of time, as I told you, this was going to go fast. Or I think I mentioned, we only have a couple minutes left. And so I'd like to answer a couple questions, and then also a couple more things about the Flagstaff Star Party. The telescope we use for this, that Dylan's using up at the Giovale Open Deck Observatory, is a 14-inch PlaneWave CDK. So the Giovale Open Deck Observatory has 6 mounted telescopes. 2 of them have cameras on them where you can project them onto the computer screen. This is one of them. And so, you can look through the eyepiece of the telescope. We don't want to lose the magic of that, but having this so-called this Malin camera with the PlaneWave 14-inch allows us to get these images. So Chris, we're just out of time. Just briefly, tell us a little bit more about the Flagstaff Star Party and where people can go to check it out, and when.
Please come to the Flagstaff's Buffalo Park. We begin sharp at 6 p.m. each evening. That's before sunset, just a little bit. With a nice sunset talk by Lowell Observatory's Brian Skiff. We also have a short twilight presentation on Thursday and Friday evening after the sunset talk. And then on Saturday, we're having an open air concert by the Dark Sky Quartet by David Kerner, who is a retired astronomer from NAU and a musician. So it's an inspiring way to connect with the night. It's free. There are 20 telescopes or more that you can look through and enjoy the night till 10 p.m. Again, we welcome you up, and it's free by support of our sponsors. And as we go out, I hope we can share a slide which recognizes some of these sponsors which have made it possible, including our members, which are not recognized individually, but we have members of the coalition. And if you want to become a member and help us get this message out, it's a mission-based membership. It's not you're going to get a shiny magazine like Sky and Telescope. It's helping us with our mission to help the world connect with the night.
Well, this has been great, Chris. It's great to talk with you. We go back a few years, and it's always nice to get together and talk about the night sky and dark skies. And I'm always so impressed with your energy and how much you've done, not just for Flagstaff or Arizona, but the entire world. Setting up Flagstaff is as this is how you do it. This is a way of doing it, a pattern for people around the world. So we really appreciate all you do and certainly taking the time to join this program tonight, because I know you have a few things going on with the Star Party coming up just around the corner.
Please go to flagstaffdarkskies.org or flagstaffstarparty.org, and you can see the schedule of events and also see our sponsors.
Yeah. Well, thanks everybody for joining us tonight. Thanks, Chris, for sharing your inspiration and hard work. I'm Dylan on telescopes, Nate behind the scenes, and the rest of our team. Thanks for making this happen, and we'll see you next time on our next live stream.